Let's talk about Netflix's The Witcher. For a while there, it was set to be their big answer to Game of Thrones, right? A massive global fantasy epic. But now, as we're looking at its fourth season, the show isn't just getting bad reviews. It's facing what looks like a full-blown fan revolt. So the question is, what went so wrong here? Let's get into it and really break down the anatomy of this failure.
I want to start with just one number, a single, absolutely brutal number, 17%. That is the audience score for the new season over on Rotten Tomatoes. And look, that's not just a bad score. That is a catastrophic rejection from the very people this show is supposed to be for. It's a statement. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Oh, it's just angry fans review bombing. But hold on. Take a look at this. The top critics, we're talking the most respected voices in the business, they were actually even harsher. Only a third of them gave it a positive review. This isn't just a fan thing. This is a critical consensus. It's universally seen as a massive disappointment. So when you see this kind of agreement from both the audience and the critics, it just begs the question, how does this happen? How does a show with this incredible source material, a gigantic budget, and a fan base that was so ready to love it, get it this wrong? Well, that's what we're here to figure out. So here's how we're going to break this all down. We're going to look at 5 key areas that led to this collapse. First, the reviews themselves. Then, the whole recasting situation with Geralt. After that, we'll get into the show's loss of focus, the drama happening behind the scenes, and finally, what feels like a complete identity crisis. All right, first up, a critical failure. Let's move past the numbers for a second and look at the actual words critics were using. Because honestly, they paint a picture that's somehow even more damning than that 17% score. I mean, just look at this. Pure BGE, which stands for background Geralt energy. Ouch. That basically means the main hero has become a background character. But it's the other ones that really hit hard. Silly, cheesy, a bloated mess. These are words you just never, ever associate with the gritty, dark, mature fantasy that the books and the games are famous for. It's not just that the show failed, it feels like it betrayed what it was supposed to be. Okay, so of course we have to talk about the single most visible, most talked about change, the recasting of Geralt himself. Let's unpack the Hemsworth in the room and see how that actually played out on screen. This quote about Liam Hemsworth's performance is just, wow. It's so insightful and so brutal at the same time. The problem wasn't that he was actively bad. The problem was that he was nothing. He was invisible. For a character like Geralt of Rivia, a character that absolutely demands this huge, commanding presence, fading into the background is probably the worst thing you can do. And this really gets to the heart of how the fans feel. Henry Cavill wasn't just an actor, he was a fan. He famously fought with the writers to keep the show true to the books. He cared. Liam Hemsworth, whether it's fair or not, comes across as just an actor doing a job. It's the difference between having a true guardian of the story and just a temporary employee. But here's the real twist in all this. As big of a deal as the recasting was, a whole lot of critics argued that it was just a symptom of a much deeper sickness in the show. A sickness that was there long before Henry Cavill walked away and would probably still be there even if he had stayed. And that brings us to what might be the single biggest issue plaguing this series. The story has completely lost its focus. I mean, Geralt of Rivia has somehow become a guest star in his own show. How does that even happen? This quote from PC Gamer, a publication that lives and breathes the world of the games, just says it all, doesn't it? It perfectly captures this widespread frustration. And, this wasn't a new complaint. Even back when Cavill was the star, people were saying Geralt was getting sidelined. But now, it's hit a boiling point. The main character feels less like the pillar of the story, and more like just one piece of a scattered ensemble. Now look, this isn't scientific data, obviously, but it perfectly illustrates how watching the show feels. It feels like we spend huge chunks of time on Ciri's journey or the endless politics of the continent, or even setting up this new spin-off gang called the Rats. And what's left for Geralt's actual quest? Just a little sliver. It feels completely out of balance. And what happens when you lose that focus? You get a total shift in tone. That gritty, monster-hunting adventure that everyone fell in love with has been replaced by what many are calling a political soap opera, filled with rambling dialogue that just leaves the core audience feeling totally alienated. So why? Why did the show stray so far from what made it great? Well, it seems like all the signs point to a major conflict behind the scenes. A fundamental battle between the show's creative team and the very source material they were supposed to be adapting. And this right here, this is the smoking gun. This quote from a former writer, Beau DeMaio, is an absolute bombshell. It suggests that people in the writer's room didn't just disagree with the source material, they actively disliked it. They were mocking it. When you hear that, suddenly all those weird changes and that feeling of disrespect that so many fans have been talking about, it all starts to make sense. So what you end up with is this deep internal clash of visions. On one side, you've got the source material, the books, and, let's be honest, especially the games that made this a global phenomenon. And on the other side, you had the showrunner, who openly said she wanted to hire writers who knew nothing about The Witcher, hoping to get fresh eyes on it, even if that meant they were starting from a place of complete ignorance about the world. You know, some commentators have boiled this all down to a failure of what they call an ego check. It's this simple idea. Before you're allowed to add your own spin to a legacy, you first have to respect and understand what made that legacy so special in the first place. It really seems like the show's creators were more interested in making their version of the story, rather than faithfully serving the story that millions of people already knew and loved. And when you put all of that together, the bad reviews, the narrative drift, the behind-the-scenes conflict, it all leads to one final, fatal question. Who is the show even for anymore? Now, to be fair, the showrunner Lauren Hissrich has a defense for this approach. She's basically argued that different versions of a story can and should coexist. She's saying, hey, our Netflix show is just one interpretation, and you can still go enjoy the books and the games. They're not going anywhere. But critics argue that this logic is just deeply flawed, because what happened in practice is this. In trying to create a show for everyone, they started by ignoring the passionate, built-in fan base that made The Witcher a global hit to begin with. And the result of trying to please everyone? You end up pleasing no one. So, when you get right down to it, this is the real story. The massive backlash isn't really about a new actor, and it's not just about one bad season. It's about a show that has fundamentally lost its way. It's a show that seems to have completely forgotten what it is, who it's for, and what made it so special in the first place. And that really leaves us with one last big question to think about. When you're adapting a story this beloved, what is your main job? Is it to serve the fans who have been there from the start, or is it simply to create a good show, regardless of the source? Because in the tragic case of The Witcher, it really feels like they've managed to fail on both counts.